World football just blew up, for real this time. UEFA, the richest, most powerful confederation in the sport, just did something it has never done in decades. It flipped the table. 55 member associations, 55 votes in favor, 0 against. A unanimous and brutally worded resolution. Unless FIFA drops its current reform plan, European teams will boycott every FIFA-run competition, and yes, that includes the World Cup itself. This isn't your run-of-the-mill industry squabble. It's not diplomatic posturing dressed up in polite language. This is an outright declaration of war. The World Cup is the most sacred stage in the sport. The pinnacle every player spends a lifetime chasing. And now, European football, home to the biggest leagues, the biggest stars, the biggest commercial empire in the game, is saying, flat out, if FIFA insists on this path, we'd rather sit it out. FIFA and UEFA have been at each other's throats for years. The Super League saga, FIFA muscling in on the Champions League calendar, the endless tug-of-war over international match dates. Business as usual, really. They'd fight, they'd bicker, and eventually find some middle ground. Even at its most aggressive, UEFA never actually put the words World Cup boycott into an official resolution. This time is different. 55 associations, not a majority, every single one. Even the members who don't always march in lockstep, smaller federations, the Eastern and Southern European associations that have historically leaned toward FIFA, fell in line without hesitation. That kind of unity is almost unheard of in UEFA's history, which tells you something. This reform plan isn't threatening some niche interest group. It's hit a red line that the entire European football establishment shares. Hey everyone, welcome back to Fudverse. Today we're diving into how world football just split down the middle. UEFA going toe-to-toe with FIFA, and the World Cup turning into a chess piece in a game of capital. Almost simultaneously, on the other side of the Atlantic, CONCACAF wasn't backing down either. 41 member associations unanimously rejected the proposal. The U.S. Soccer Federation went so far as to issue its own statement, formally pledging to stand shoulder to shoulder with every CONCACAF member in opposing the reform. Just like that, a clean fault line split the football world in two. Europe on one side, North and Central America on the other, both furious. And yet, right in the middle of all this, South America, home to Messi, home to some of the deepest World Cup pedigree on the planet, has gone eerily quiet. No statement, no vote, no position at all. As if this earthquake shaking the entire footballing world had nothing to do with them. Same sport, same tournament, same reform plan, pushed by the same man, Gianni Infantino. So why the two completely opposite reactions? What's really driving this power struggle underneath? To understand the split, you need to understand the plan that lit the fuse. It's called FFE. And in plain terms, Infantino wants to bundle the broadcast rights, sponsorship rights, and merchandising rights for the two most commercially valuable properties in football, the World Cup and the Club World Cup, into a single new company. That company's valuation? $20 billion. And Infantino's plan is to sell equity stakes to private investors in exchange for a massive cash injection. That alone was explosive enough. The World Cup and the Club World Cup tournaments millions of fans consider the very soul of the game, about to have their commercial lifeblood packaged up like a financial asset for sale to the highest bidder. But what really set the sport on fire was the rumor about who's actually buying in. Multiple sources suggest the investors behind this massive deal have close personal ties to the Trump family. In other words, the World Cup a event that's supposed to belong to all of humanity, could quietly become a bargaining chip inside one political family's network. Once that came out, there was no putting UEFA's anger back in the bottle. Some might ask, so what if they bring in some outside investment? Football's been commercialized before. Why is UEFA acting like it's willing to skip the entire World Cup over this? The answer isn't complicated. To UEFA, and honestly, to most people who genuinely love this game, the World Cup was never supposed to belong to any private capital. It belongs to fans everywhere. To every person who's ever stayed up past midnight cheering for their national team. To every kid mimicking their heroes' celebrations in a cheap replica jersey on some street corner. What makes the World Cup special is exactly that public quality. It's not a straight-up business like the Premier League or La Liga. It's more like a shared cultural ritual for all of humanity. Once every 4 years, crossing borders, races, and classes, the entire planet holds its breath at the same moment. Once private capital officially walks through the door, how long does that purity actually survive? On paper, investors might promise not to interfere with the football itself, not to decide who plays, who scores, who wins. But the logic of the business world is never that simple. Private capital wants one thing: maximum returns. And maximizing returns means investors will be staring hard at every line of that $20 billion company's financial statements, every broadcast rights renewal. So here come the real questions. Can the schedule be tightened up to squeeze in more ad breaks? Can broadcast ad density go up? Could a tournament that's meant so much, precisely because it only comes around every 4 years, get shrunk down to every 2, just to speed up the cash flow? Once capital actually holds the reins, almost none of these questions escape reconsideration. Today's promises of neutrality and public good have a way of quietly eroding under enough commercial pressure. What UEFA is really afraid of isn't FIFA making money. It's the World Cup one day becoming a puppet on capital's strings, still glossy on the outside, but hollowed out on the inside. And this fear isn't baseless. Look across the global sports industry, and you'll find plenty of precedent for what happens once private capital takes control of a marquee event, tournament cycles compressed for faster returns, schedules stretched out to cram in more sponsorships, rules quietly rewritten in the name of broadcast appeal or commercial hooks. Sports has taught this lesson before. Once capital's voice outweighs the organizers and the participants, the priorities quietly flip. Commercial return first, competitive integrity second, fan experience third. What makes UEFA even more uneasy this time is exactly who's rumored to be buying in. If the reports are true, and this investment really is tied to a political family's network of interests, then what the World Cup represents stops being purely a business question. It risks becoming a geopolitical tool. Whoever controls the World Cup's commercial lifeline could indirectly influence how resources get allocated, who holds diplomatic leverage, even how certain countries and regions get to shape their global image. That's a long way from how should a football match be run. It's really a question of who gets to define this crown jewel of world sport and who gets their hands on the steering wheel. So UEFA's hardline stance here isn't just about protecting commercial interests. It's about protecting a voice, the last line of defense against this sport being privatized and weaponized by a handful of capital and political interests. Facing this level of backlash, Infantino hasn't shown much sign of backing down. And there's a simple reason why. He's holding a thick checkbook and a carefully calculated vote count. FIFA currently has 211 member associations. Under the current voting rules, this reform only needs 106 votes to pass. Let's do the math. UEFA's 55 votes against, plus CONCACAF's 41 votes against, gets you to 96 no votes, tantalizingly close to blocking it. But Infantino's math goes further than that. He doesn't need to win over the stubborn Europeans, and he doesn't need to chase down CONCACAF's united front either. He just needs to turn his attention to three other continents: Africa, Asia, and Oceania. And reportedly, the price tag attached to this deal comes out to roughly $40 million per vote. $40 million might feel almost insulting to European football, sitting on billions in broadcast deals with clubs stacked with superstars. But for a lot of smaller, cash-strapped federations around the world, the ones struggling with basic infrastructure, struggling to fund youth development, that's real, life-changing money. It could build an actual training facility. It could cover years of national team travel and camps. It could turn a federation from barely scraping by into something functional. That's Infantino's leverage. He doesn't need the whole world on board. He just needs to win the numbers game and hit 106. And in that game, Africa, Asia, and Oceania combined could easily be the tipping point. But UEFA isn't without leverage of its own. For one, Europe is the World Cup's biggest paying customer. The richest broadcast deals, the most star-studded sponsor lineups, the highest value endorsements, nearly all of it is concentrated in Europe. The biggest names in the game right now, Messi, Mbappe, Haaland, play almost exclusively in Europe's top 5 leagues. Strip Europe's clubs and stars out of the equation, and a World Cup's commercial value doesn't just dip, it could collapse. What savvy investor wants to bankroll a discounted World Cup missing half its star power? Second, UEFA is sitting on two aces of its own, the European Championship and the Champions League. Already among the most commercially valuable, most watched competitions on Earth. If it truly comes to a full break with FIFA, UEFA has more than enough infrastructure to build an entirely separate competition ecosystem outside FIFA's control. And here's the real nuclear option. If UEFA and its member associations collectively agree not to release players for FIFA-run tournaments, the next World Cup could show up missing most of the sport's biggest stars. Infantino might still scrape together his 106 votes and push the reform through, but he wouldn't be able to conjure up a tournament that billions of fans actually want to sit down and watch. A World Cup without its stars? Is that even a World Cup anymore? That may well be the sword hanging over Infantino's head right now. All eyes are now on South America, a continent with 5 World Cup titles, the birthplace of Pelé, Maradona, and Messi, waiting to see where it lands. But South America's Football Confederation, CONMEBOL, has stayed conspicuously silent. No fiery statement, no unified vote, not even an official comment. And anyone who actually understands the power dynamics of world football knows this silence is anything but accidental, and it's certainly not neutrality. Look back at every major reform FIFA has pushed through in recent years, and CONMEBOL has almost always been Infantino's most reliable ally. From expanding the World Cup to 48 teams, to the once floated 64-team idea, to the controversial commercial overhaul of the Club World Cup, CONMEBOL has consistently been one of the most enthusiastic backers. The reasoning isn't complicated. South America never built a commercial ecosystem powerful enough to stand on its own, outside FIFA's system. Nothing with the earning power of the Champions League. Its overall revenue and global influence have long depended heavily on FIFA's global competition structure, which means CONMEBOL's core interests are already deeply intertwined with Infantino's globalization strategy. And Infantino's payback has been pretty concrete. For the 2030 Centennial World Cup, he specifically arranged for the opening match to be hosted across Uruguay, Argentina, and Paraguay the very region where the first World Cup was held back in 1930. Part tribute to history, part quiet political gift. So CONMEBOL's silence isn't really neutrality at all. It's a silent alignment. They've already picked their side. They just don't want to burn the bridge publicly at this particular moment. Dig a little deeper, and there are more telling details. CONMEBOL President Alejandro Dominguez and Infantino are known to be close, and the two have repeatedly praised each other's reform visions in public. When the Club World Cup expanded to 32 teams, CONMEBOL didn't push back the way UEFA did. Instead, they actively cooperated, helping coordinate club schedules to make sure South American teams could take part smoothly. Meanwhile, South American football is dealing with some very real economic pressure of its own. Argentina and Brazil can lean on transfer fees and sponsorships to stay afloat. But federations like Bolivia, Venezuela, and Ecuador have long struggled just to keep youth development and national teams running on tight budgets. For them, FIFA's annual development funding and revenue distribution isn't a nice to have. It's practically a lifeline. Publicly siding against FIFA would risk losing not just the honor of hosting the Centennial Opener, but years of real financial support down the line. Add it all up, and CONMEBOL's silence looks less like fence-sitting and more like a cold, pragmatic calculation. A decision grounded in survival, not some idealistic stand above the fray. That, more than anything, might be the real difference between South American and European football right now. In all this noise about federations, confederations, and capital squaring off, most of the headlines focus on the power players. But there are three groups actually caught in the middle of all this: fans, players, and clubs. For ordinary fans, the worry is simple. If FIFA and UEFA really do go all the way with this, does that mean the one tournament they wait 4 years for might just not happen the way they expect? A World Cup without European stars. Can you even call that a World Cup? The Messi-Ronaldo era just wrapped up, and a new generation, Mbappe, Haaland, Bellingham, is stepping into the spotlight. If clubs refuse to release them, even the most die-hard fans might struggle to get excited about a tournament like that. Players are stuck in an even tougher spot. On one hand, representing your country at a World Cup is basically the deepest honor written into a professional footballer's DNA. On the other, their actual livelihood, salary, injury coverage, career trajectory is tied entirely to their clubs. If UEFA and the top clubs coordinate a blanket refusal to release players, footballers get caught in the crossfire between national pride and contractual obligation. And clubs, honestly, are more resolute than people might expect. As Champions League revenue keeps climbing and transfer fees keep hitting record highs, clubs have grown fiercely protective of their star assets. If the World Cup really does turn into a cash machine controlled by FIFA and private capital, why would any club keep handing over the players they spent a fortune developing or acquiring for free to a tournament they have zero say in, one that might even work against their own commercial interests? Put those three anxieties together, and you get a much bigger, messier picture than the simple FIFA versus UEFA narrative suggests. This is a systemic crisis running through the entire football supply chain, top to bottom. On the surface, this whole confrontation looks like a fight over business plans, voting rules, and dollar figures. But zoom out, and it exposes something a lot more uncomfortable at the core of this sport. Passion, in the end, doesn't beat raw self-interest. Sentiment, in the end, doesn't outmuscle real money. For UEFA, what they're defending is almost an idealistic conviction, keeping the World Cup as a shared symbol for all of humanity, rather than just another line item on a private equity firm's balance sheet. For a lot of the smaller federations in Africa, Asia, and Oceania, the reality is chronic underfunding, threadbare travel budgets, day-to-day survival pressure. $40 million in cold cash speaks a lot louder than a slogan about protecting football's purity. And for CONMEBOL, they've chosen the pragmatic path, staying tightly bound to FIFA. Because compared to some abstract ideal, hosting a centennial World Cup opener is something you can actually hold in your hands. There's no clean hero or villain in this story. Nobody here is pure justice, and nobody's the outright bad guy. Every side is simply acting according to its own circumstances and its own long-term interests. Some are willing to sit out the World Cup itself to protect the game's original spirit. Others are using this same sport to secure real breathing room and real resources for their own survival. Neither is absolutely right or wrong, just different positions producing different choices. However this all shakes out, whether Infantino pushes the reform through with his 106 votes, or UEFA and CONCACAF force FIFA to blink first, one thing is basically certain. The World Cup, this tournament that has carried so much pure, unguarded love and dreaming for so many ordinary people, is drifting further and further toward a future defined by deeper commercialization and capital's own logic. Maybe we'll still get to sit in front of our TVs, watch the flags we recognize waving, hear the anthems we know by heart, watch players pouring everything onto the pitch, chasing glory. But underneath that familiar surface, how much room will really be left for the kind of love that has nothing to do with calculation or profit? That might be the question this whole earthquake leaves every fan to sit with. Once the World Cup fully becomes a precision-engineered harvesting machine for capital, once every tournament cycle, every match schedule, every broadcast slot gets weighed and measured by investors staring at spreadsheets, this event, the one thing on Earth capable of uniting so many people at once, may slowly lose the thing that made it what it was. And maybe all we can really do, as the people who've witnessed this sport at its best, is remember what it used to look like. Remember the moments that made us tear up, the nights we couldn't sleep. Remember what that unfiltered, uncalculated love was actually supposed to feel like. Where football goes from here, how this tug of war between capital and passion ultimately plays out, only time will tell. But one thing is already crystal clear. This footballing earthquake of 2026 has shown us that in an era where capital finds its way into everything, even something as seemingly untouchable as the World Cup can't fully stay above it all.